President Trump was asked for his take on the Plattner scandal yesterday aboard Air Force One. Here's what he said.
He steps out of the race.
So he won the primary.
And now there's these new allegations.
It's very hard for them to do. And it's really a question of whether or not you believe the woman. A lot of people say big falsehoods. It's he's in a bind. He's in a bind. But should they be able to do it? Well, I guess he's going to lose. I would imagine he's going to lose.
President Trump aboard Air Force One saying a lot of people spread falsehoods, perhaps referring to some of his own allegations against him. Let's bring in senior political correspondent at Wired, Hugo Lowell. He's looking at how Republican operatives say they are confident Senator Susan Collins will hold her seat no matter who replaces Graham Plattner on the ticket. Hugo, it's great to see you. Welcome back to the table. So let's talk about this, because I think you're right that Republicans thought even if Plattner remained on the ballot, they liked their odds in Maine with Susan Collins, but they are now sort of enjoying, as Kevin Fry just described it, the chaos that will ensue for the next couple of weeks here.
I think that's correct. I think Republicans, in general, wanted Plattner to remain in the race because of all of the baggage that came with that campaign. But it is pretty clear at this point that he obviously is not going to be in it, and they're going to have to find a new candidate. And it's not like Trump vote is any more prescient than anyone else, and it's not like they know what's coming. But there are two things that they are looking at. One is, can they find a Democratic replacement who can carry that same progressive message forward without the baggage being tagged on their backside? If you look at some of the candidates that are kind of popping up as frontrunners, someone like Troy Jackson, the former state senator in Maine, he was endorsed by Plattner to be the governor. So he still has Plattner ties. People like Shanna Bellows, the Maine Secretary of State, whose real record is trying to get Trump off the primary ballot in 2023. That might be great for Democrats in special election, but is it going to be particularly convincing in a general? That's the sort of things Trump is looking at. And then there's the fundraising thing. Is there enough of a cloud now over this race that Democrats might feel kind of leery of putting money behind the replacement candidate? And it's a very expensive race. Ad Impact think this will be a $300 million plus race. So, $150 million each. You're going to have to. There's some difficult decisions for Democrats to make, because the DSCC is at a $10 million cash on hand disadvantage compared to Republicans. And a lot of this is going to have to be now raised from small dollar donors, and that's a really big deficit to cover.
Mike, you understand Maine very well. It's not just the progressive message. It was the package it came in with Graham Plattner, all the scandals previous to this one that led him to leave the race. By and large, Maine voters said, okay, I don't like it, but I'm willing to stick with this guy. He seems like one of us. He's a veteran. He's an oyster fisherman, all the things we know about him. He doesn't look like a politician. So it will be important who comes next year.
Well, the interesting thing is you speak to some people in Maine, and they tell you that Plattner could still win if he had stayed in the race. Now, I don't know whether that's the case or not, but this is on Graham Plattner. I mean, he knew all of these things were potentially out there, and the fact that he didn't step up and address it once and for all a couple of months ago is kind of ridiculous. But to your point, this is an incredibly short runway for any nominee who is now on the ballot in November running for the United States Senate against Susan Collins, who, according to people you talk to, is very beatable in Maine. But we're talking about maybe a 6-week window now to run against her, really, when people focus on the election. What do your people tell you about the short runway, the danger of the short runway?
Well, I think in the main, I think Trump world thinks the short runway is beneficial for Collins. I think their takeaway is Democrats have to run a perfect race now. From here on now, they have to run a perfect race. It has obviously been anything but that in the previous few weeks. There is the sense, though, that Collins could just eke out a victory because she won in 2008, she won in 2020, she bucked Joe Biden's win. They see her as someone like the least offensive Republican candidate out there that they could have possibly fielded. So I think they like their chances. But again, it's all margin of error right now. And if there is room to pick up a seat in the Senate, this is one of them.
Yeah.
Well, I would think, Caddy K, if you want to look at any state that the Democrats have a chance of winning, a generic Democrat I mean, the old saying in the South, a yellow dog Democrat, if you ran a yellow dog against a Republican, they'd win. You can say that about Maine. I mean, Joe Biden won Maine by 9 points. Kamala Harris, I think, won it by 5. Republicans haven't won the state since 1988, I think, in a presidential election. This really isn't a purple state, except for when it comes to Susan Collins. And so it seems to me at this point, after all of this chaos, the Democrats' best hope is to find a generic candidate to put next to Susan Collins, because, yes, she's strong in Maine, but of all the chances for pickups, Maine still has to be at the top of the list for Democrats.
Which I guess was Janet Mills' argument all along, right, Joe? I mean, we had her on the program, and that's what the case that she was trying to make, that what you want in Maine is not actually a Graham Plattner. I mean, maybe Graham Plattner is more of a Montana candidate. Maybe he's more of a West Virginia candidate. The average voting age, I was speaking to a Maine politician who said to me the average voting age is 52. The demographic you're trying to win over in Maine as a Democrat are those middle-aged female voters who lean Democratic but have voted for Susan Collins a couple of cycles and like her because she comes across as a moderate Republican. Those are the people that you're trying to win back again if you really want to win the race in Maine. And I think, those are going to be the discussion. It's going to be interesting to see how does that discussion now carry forward to other states? How does it carry forward to the Michigan race for the Senate seat there? So I think the Democratic Party has a lot of questions to ask, and these are big questions about populism and energy and generational shift, as we've been talking about, and to some extent about policy. And what does Maine do now for that wing of the Democratic Party that feels the energy but has taken such a knock in its actual ability or its attempt to try and win a race in Maine?